On August 7th, 1952, 13-year-old Evelyn Oswald and her 11-year-old sister Virginia left their quaint Sheboygan, Michigan home to walk their dog in an abandoned gravel quarry nearby. As their dog eagerly licked at the shallow water pooled at the pit's base, their attention was drawn to something half-submerged along the water's edge. As they approached the object, they realized it was a human foot sticking out from the sandy dirt. The sisters became panicked and fled home to seek help. Police discovered the skeletal remains of a young woman who was quickly identified as 14-year-old Margaret Byrne. Margaret's body was buried under a thin layer of sand and gravel, topped with a makeshift shroud of flattened cardboard boxes. The shallow water collecting at the pit's bottom had disturbed the debris, revealing a portion of her torso. Margaret was discovered wearing only a pink bra, but a small suitcase buried nearby contained several items of her clothing. Detectives noted that the suitcase's contents were carelessly packed. An autopsy painted a grim picture of Margaret's final moments. Extensive bruises on her wrists and neck, a cracked sternum, and a blunt force hit to the back of her skull all indicated a violent struggle. Her cause of death was determined to be strangulation. The medical examiner estimated that Margaret had been dead for several weeks. Sexual assault was suspected, but not confirmed. Margaret, a high school sophomore, lived only 2 miles from the abandoned gravel pit. She lived with her parents, Albert, 41, a factory worker, and Loretta, 31, a part-time waitress, and her 2 younger siblings, Donna, 9, and Raymond, 11. Margaret had disappeared on July 14th. Her family found a note stating that she planned to visit her grandparents in Onaway, Michigan, some 30 miles away, to look for babysitting work. Despite her extended absence, Margaret was not reported missing until July 27th. Albert, who had a significant criminal past, was immediately viewed with suspicion. In 1930, he was arrested for robbery in Missouri. He was released after serving 2 years, only to be jailed again shortly thereafter on another burglary conviction. This time, he was sentenced to 4 years. In 1937, Albert relocated to Flint, Michigan. The following year, he was arrested for forgery. Albert was paroled again in 1939 and arrested the day following his release on charges of statutory rape after his relationship with Loretta, aged 15, was revealed. However, Albert's charges were withdrawn when he married Loretta in January 1940. Albert was arrested in Lansing, Michigan in 1942 and charged with stealing. He was sentenced to 4 years in jail, but following a failed escape attempt in 1944, his sentence was extended by 1.5 years. He was granted release again in late 1944. Loretta and Albert divorced in 1945, but Loretta remained at home with Albert and their 3 children. Albert was brought in for interrogation and vehemently denied any involvement in his daughter's death. He claimed that when he discovered Margaret hadn't contacted her grandparents, he assumed she had found a babysitting job elsewhere and had no reason to believe she was in danger. He described Margaret as a headstrong but quiet and nice young lady, emphasizing that there were no problems at home except Margaret's occasional threat to leave. Albert was released following a polygraph test. Questioning Margaret's neighbors and friends revealed a consistent picture of a conscientious, well-mannered young woman who preferred solitude to social events. Neighbors also praised Margaret's babysitting abilities, mentioning how much their children enjoyed her care. Nobody reported any signs of trouble at the Byrne home. The case was at a stalemate until late August, when a neighbor, Earl Carlson, came forward with new information. Earl claimed to have seen Albert in a furious argument with a woman outside the Byrne home at 7:30 p.m. on the night Margaret disappeared. However, he now believed the woman was Margaret, who was described as large for her age, standing 5 feet 7 inches and weighing between 140 and 150 pounds. Albert was arrested and charged with Margaret's murder. Loretta testified against him, claiming that he fought when she wanted to report Margaret missing right away. Loretta said that she filed a missing person report 2 weeks later, without Albert's knowledge. She also stated that Albert was an alcoholic and had physically abused the children. She closed her testimony by pleading with the jurors to give him the maximum sentence. The case against Albert appeared strong until a new witness emerged: Margaret's friend, 16-year-old Faye Faircloth. Faye claimed she saw Margaret alive and well in Onaway, Michigan on July 16th, 2 days after she disappeared from her home. Margaret was riding in the passenger seat of someone's vehicle, according to Faye, but the driver could not be identified. Loretta and Albert had been divorced for several years, but were living together at the time. Loretta had testified against Albert during the trial. After the trial, Loretta was quoted in a newspaper stating, quote, "She was going to Drayton Plains, Michigan, and remarry." And she did. She married my great-uncle, Basil J. Peters. There are those of us who know that Albert is innocent and know who the real murderer is, his proclaimed motivation, and that Margaret was likely his second young female victim. In April 2011, I contacted the Cheboygan Sheriff Department, specifically Date-Lant Tim Cook. But all the players and witnesses are long dead, and they declined to pursue this case. Rest in peace, Margaret Ellen Byrne.